Hello, BookTube. Welcome to the History Shelf and welcome back, returning guest. We are so excited to have Helena P. Schrader back on the channel. Today, we are talking about the Templars and her updated third edition, right? Was it third edition?
Yeah, that's
Uh,
right.
of The Tale of the English Templar. I just finished reading it, and as you can see, got my little tags on here. Just I loved it. Uh, it's kind of fun. Let me just, as way of introducing Helena to the folks who maybe haven't seen our first interview, which I will link in the description box below, so go check that out. Um, Helena recently finished her other novel to finish up her Bridge to Tomorrow series, The Berlin Airlift, which I loved. And I noticed too, Helena, that the I saw the jacket cover for Cold Victory, and it looked like my there was a
Yes,
blurb.
I
My
did. I did.
quote
I
for
did.
my review, the War
Yes.
and Peace of the Berlin Airlift.
Thank you. Thank you.
I saw that and I said, "Oh my God, they blurbed my review on the cover." I was excited for that and excited for you. And just as a note, we will be following up on the Bridge to Tomorrow series. We'll have Helena back on the program again once I've read Cold Victory, and then we'll kind of look at the whole trilogy as a whole and just discuss some of the broader themes. Lessons from history, that kind of stuff. But today we are going back to medieval times. Yes, we're going back to the Templars, which I've always been fascinated about. And I learned a lot more from reading this book, and I'm hoping we can go into some of those details as far as research and stuff like that. But as an introduction, when did you first, is this one of your first novels or?
Yeah, it's probably the third book I published. It's hard. That sounds like I should know. It's not that easy. Like the first book that was technically published was a nonfiction book, and after I'd had that success, I then pulled up books that I had written and were literally just in my computer, and
Mhm.
I started putting them out. So this book was written 30 years ago. I think it was first published in like 97 or something.
Okay.
But the research I did for it and the inspiration for it really goes back fully 30 years. And it was when I brought it out as the third in a series called the Templar Trilogy.
Okay.
The middle of those three books was so, and that cover it's three generations of men. So the Templar Trilogy starts with Jacques de Breton
Yeah.
in Cyprus during Louis the Ninth, of St. Louis Crusade in
Mhm.
1250 on Cyprus. The second book was about his son and basically the fall of Acre. And this third book is basically it's the generation of his granddaughter. Geoffrey's still alive, but the granddaughter and the son are also referenced but not in it. And it's the fall of the Templars in 1308 to 1311.
That's
So it's three generations. It covers three different key parts of Templar history.
hmm
What happened is that as a novelist, I mature, I develop, I pulled the second one out of the trilogy. I didn't feel it was good. It
Oh,
had a lot, again, like this, a lot of raw energy, some, I think, quite compelling scenes, but I didn't think it worked as a novel.
okay.
And I yanked it off the market, which means that rips up the trilogy. There's no longer a trilogy. The St. Louis Knight is still on the market. In fact, it was recently chosen by Amazon for their audiobook, their AI audiobook program, which since it was free, I said, sure, fine. So
Okay.
that's available. That's available in audio, Kindle, or in paperback.
Okay.
I did it all with Kindle Direct. And so that's there. Um, and again, I don't say it's a bad novel, but it's something, it's still an very early novel.
hmm
This one I had written, as I said, 30 years ago,
Okay.
under the title just The English Templar. And I had a question over Christmas. Did you want me to go into this in detail? I had a Christmas
Yes.
over Christmas from another reader who referenced Najak, which plays a major role in this novel. It's the setting of
Yes.
many of the scenes, and it's the family it holds the lordship of Najak. And so I went back to look at it, looking for things. descriptions of a shock. And I got sucked into the novel and I said to myself, actually, this book deserves I'm not it's not a perfect novel, but I found it so compelling and so emotional when I was reading it that I thought it really deserves to be an ebook, which it's not because it had been published before the days of ebook.
Hmm.
So the first thought was, so I contacted the publisher and said, look, I'd like to do an ebook version of this. And they said, fine. And then I said to myself, what the hell am I doing? They have done nothing with this book for 30 years.
Yeah.
They have done no marketing for it. I don't remember ever earning a cent from it. And I just said to myself, I'm yanking it. So I wrote back and said, I'm pulling it. I'm going to revise the book and I don't want the old version out there anymore. And I severed the contact with iUniverse. And then I just went, if I'm going to redo it, if I'm going to do it anyway, I did. I ended up, but I didn't. I was writing Cold Victory. I was still finishing up Cold, or I had written Cold Victory, but I was working on the editing and rewriting it, and I had other projects. So I didn't want to, and I did not want. I also don't want to do too much. If you start rewriting something that's
Hmm.
that old, there's the danger of trying of creating confusion,
Hmm.
order, counter order, disorder, the kind of thing where. So I tried to keep my intervention light. I did not seek to completely it's all omniscient. There's a lot of head jumping in it. If people hate that, tough luck. I didn't, in fact, I actually, when reading it, I thought, actually, this works very, very well. Why I should do more of it. I shouldn't allow myself to be terrorized by certain fads now.
Okay.
So I left things there. As I say, if I had written the book today, it would read differently. It
Hmm.
would have, but I didn't, and it's not a new book. It is simply, it's the old book with modifications. I did change the order of some of the chapters and I
Hmm.
cut some scenes. I stripped it down a little bit and I tried to polish the language where I found it overly burdened, shall we say. I tried but I didn't change the line. I didn't rewrite it. If,
Okay. Hmm.
yeah.
Okay. And it's interesting how you mentioned head jumping. I never have a proper phrase for that, but you just that is really good because I did notice like at certain points we might hop into someone else's thoughts, but it did work. I can tell you that I because I've read a lot of other uh a lot of other independent novels and stuff, and I've seen where it's when it's done wrong, and it's just like, oh, this does not, but this one was uh, very subtle, and
Mhm.
it did offer a wider range of viewpoints. It added more depth, I think, to the novel itself. Um, so
Thank you. I'm very, very fanatical about the fact that I will not write a book from one perspective because I think that's like trying to film a movie with a single camera.
mhm,
You would never, I mean, except for a very artsy film for a very short episode, you would not really try to do a major drama, War and Peace, which is my books that tend to be, multi-character, multi-event over time, wide canvas kind of stuff. I'm not doing artsy, this is 5 minutes, in the life of a cat. I'm doing very, very broad canvas kind of stuff. And to try to do everything from one perspective would be absolutely disastrous.
mhm.
What nowadays is that you're allowed to do that, but you sort of have to do them in different chapters. And in the Tale of the English Cat, I do scenes where in the same scene, you see it from the point of view of of the interrogator and of the interrogated.
Okay.
That has strengths.
Oh, it does.
And, but as you say, it has to be done with great caution. So,
Great caution and great skill. Which I thought that was in abundance in the novel. And so just for, obviously I've read it, but the rest of our audience hasn't. So let's give them like a synopsis of the plot. I know our main character here is of course, the English Templar, and that is Sir Percival de Lacy. Is that?
okay. Yep.
And also known as Percy, to those near and dear to him. Do you want to give like a spoiler-free summary of?
Well, it's the
Well,
thing, though, in a way, one of the things I did when I redid the new edition is I started at the critical scene where Sir Percy meets Felice de
yeah.
Poitou. And this is not a romance. It is not a love story. Their first encounter has nothing to do with love at first sight.
Yeah.
The fundamental issue is this is the story, it's the story of the destruction of the Templars. And the opening scene, as it is now written, is that the English Templar, Sir Percy, who has been in the hands of I was about to say Gestapo, of the Inquisition for 6 months, has been tortured into a false confession and is a broken man who is being transported to Poitiers in a prisoner transport
Mhm.
with two broken legs and other wounds. And he realizes that he's not chained in the wagon.
Mhm.
And he manages because they're distracted by another wagon that's stuck in the snow, and the guards are out helping and a wine merchant and getting tipsy. And sees this as an opportunity. Okay, this is a bit of a spoiler. I shouldn't have said all that. He realizes he can drag himself off the wagon and get himself in the snow. It's snowing heavily, and his only objective is to die.
Yeah.
His only objective, the only thing he hopes is that he can avoid being tortured again.
Mhm. Mhm.
He is trying to escape pain and shame, the fact that he's broken, the fact that he's confessed, the fact that he's denied an order he loves, he's denied Christ who he loves. He is a totally broken man who just wants to die.
Mhm.
And then a few hours later, he's on the side of the road in the snow, still gradually being covered by snow, but he's not dead yet when two more riders come along.
Yeah.
And I guess the best thing is truly to read this because it says, and then he hopes they won't see him, but when one of the riders starts crying, Christ in heaven, someone was murdered right here. Look, you can see blood on the snow, how they dragged the body off the road.
Mhm.
Jesus, the corpse is still there. These words killed Percy's fervent hope that he might go unnoticed. He
Mhm.
closed his eyes in despair and tried to brace for the pain that would inevitably follow.
Mhm.
Oh my God, the youth continued to wail in a high-pitched voice. What if the cutthroats are still at hand? Jesus, what are we going to do? With a grimace of distaste, Percy concluded that the young man was a cleric, probably a novice or student. Then he heard a dull thud and opened his eyes again to see that the second rider had nimbly jumped down from his mount. The rider turned towards him, and Percy caught his breath in shock. The second rider was a girl. Clutching her skirts in one hand and leading her reluctant mare in the other, she advanced cautiously but calmly towards the ditch where Percy lay. Behind her, her companion called out, Felice, what are you doing? Are you mad? But the
Mhm.
girl ignored her companion and continued towards Percy. Percy focused his entire consciousness on her, yet he saw neither her youth nor her beauty. He was oblivious to indications of wealth and station on her clothes and the trappings of her horse. He looked through and past all attributes of her mortal shell, seeking instead the immortal soul inside. His
Mhm.
fate hung in her hands. If her soul was filled with hate or greed, she would turn him over to his tormentors. If, on the other hand, her soul were gentle, she might take pity on him and allow him to slide into oblivion. Their eyes locked, and Percy felt a jolt go through his whole body. The soul that returned his gaze was neither evil nor weak. Filled with the love of God, it possessed compassion, intelligence, and courage. This soul wanted to help, and more astonishingly, was brave enough to try.
Mhm.
Overwhelmed with gratitude, Percy closed his eyes and surrendered to her. So that's the premise of the novel. He gets rescued by this. But I cannot stress this enough. It isn't a love story in the sense that she goes and gets her grandfather, who is the Templar from the
Mhm.
first of the series. Her grandfather is the one who takes him on his horse, who gets him to this castle, who protects him, who shelters him, who finds other places to hide him. The entire impulse for the rescue comes from the nobleman, her grandfather,
Right.
who is wealthy and powerful.
Hmm.
This is not some young girl who can flit around the countryside taking care of somebody.
Right.
And Percy, when he's first recovering, does not even remember her except as the Virgin Mary who took him on her lap when he thought
Right.
he was dying.
Oh.
It's later he realizes she was actually a girl and not just the Mother Mary who saved him. He's embarrassed.
Hmm.
He pulls back from her. It's shocking. He's embarrassed because he was filthy and covered with fleas and stinking and the
Yeah.
idea that a beautiful maiden had seen him in that condition is humiliating to him.
Yes.
So that this to me it's very important that the relationship between them is is complex, but it's not without love, but it is not a traditional love at first sight erotic attraction.
And well, and that's why it worked so well. I really, well, first of all, it was a different time. I think we should, remind folks out there that this was a different time, and there were different mores for, men and women, especially women. And uh,
But
it.
Percy's a monk. Percy has taken a vow of chastity, and he takes that very seriously. Although, as we see in the course of the novel, Percy is the fundamental story of the novel is Percy's story from being a proud son of an English baronial family,
Mhm,
being broken, being rescued, recovering, uh, becoming overmutig is the German word, as a becoming overconfident, going through another crisis,
mhm,
losing his faith. So the book is very much about Percy's development and how this experience affects him.
yes.
And as I say, and through most of the novel, Percy is a monk who takes his vows seriously.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, and I noticed the I'm trying to frame this for those watching. There's the overarching storyline of the Inquisition against the Templars.
Mhm.
And then there's the kind of the resistance, if you will, with is it you pronounce it Joffrey or
Joffrey, whatever, yeah.
Joffrey? Okay, he is the nobleman. He that uh, with his granddaughter Felice take Percy in and try to hide him from all the bishops and people coming after him. Um, and I'm going to be careful not to reveal any plot points, but the major thing is it's about the resistance. It's about trying to clear the name of the order and also rescue a lot of the other Templars who were
Yeah,
being tortured and in dungeons. So I'd like to talk about the historical uh,
right.
fact of that, and then we'll get back into just the subplot with the characters and the themes that I picked up on. And one of them, which I love, obviously, is just there's such a rich conversation going on within the characters of about not only faith, but this dedication to an oath. Like they took vows and oaths very seriously,
Yeah.
very, very literally. Um, and there's always these type of internal conflicts, and I love how the characters kind of both within themselves and with each other try to talk out these issues, you know. But let's talk about then the what was the
The
scenario with it?
historical. Okay,
Yeah,
the history itself is very, very well recorded. Philip the Fourth in 1308, Philip the Fourth was the king of France. He was always short of money, and he had gone through a series. He'd attacked when he needed money. He would hit people up for money, like people we know nowadays. But in this case, what he would do is he would accuse whoever he was attacking, whether it was the Jews, or the Italian bankers, or the previous pope, or anyone, he would accuse them of heresy and sodomy. And he had a sort of a catalog of you're a lib and a dem and a socialist, and therefore you're not worthy of life, right?
right.
So because we could just use the same phrases over and over again. Anytime you don't like somebody, you just accuse them of being a lib dem.
Hmm.
Um, a communist, right?
Yeah,
So
demonizing and
yeah.
yeah.
And so he took out his having had dinner with the chair. He invites the Grand Master of the Templars to Paris, and they're out and wining and dining together, and very friendly and chatting. And then he orders the arrest of all the Templars in France. It was sort of like the Ukraine attack on the Soviet Union. It was a very well planned attack all across France on the same night. Sheriffs went and attacked. They went to the Templar commanderies in France in the dead of night in the darkness, and they arrested the men basically while they were sleeping. And
Hmm.
they arrested all the Templars in France in a single sweep. I mean, it was amazing. I brought another book here, which is one of my favorite books. It's Le Site Templaire de France. And it's simply a book which records where all of the known commanderies in France were based on just on the modern direct department. So if you want to go to Champagne and Berry, you can
Hmm.
see, okay, here. And there isn't one of these little tiny places in France that doesn't have dozens of Templar commanderies. And their main houses and secondary houses. I mean, Limousin, you can't see it, I know, but there's literally 2 dozen of these things.
Hmm.
There were Templar houses all across France. There were hundreds. I think I'd have to get Malcolm Barber out. Um, and what these were was they were farmhouses. The Hal Nicholson has done a wonderful book called The Templars at Home that focuses on the vast majority of Templars who were farmers and peasants
Hmm. Hmm.
working the properties that had been donated to the Templars. The Templars maintained those fantastic castles and their fighting army in the Holy Land because of the money they earned from their properties across the West, from Portugal and all across France and England and the Holy Roman Empire and Italy. Their wealth was in land that spread all across Western Europe.
Hmm.
Those farms produced this was an agricultural based society, so that the produce from a farm was sold at market, and then you had the cash, and that was the source of Templar wealth. Occasionally, people donated a mill or an orchard, which made even more money, or they might have given jewels, or they might have left gold. But the vast majority of Templar wealth came from their landed properties, which had been bequeathed to them, normally in wills by
Hmm.
patrons who thought they were doing a good thing and they wanted to support them the same way when we have a will, we say, well, I want to support, National Wildlife, or I want to give money to the Cat Foundation or whatever. So that's how they had accumulated this huge amount of wealth. And those Templar properties, they were farms, would be run by maybe just a Templar sergeant, or very, very rarely more than a sergeant, and they would be the people working on the land, like on most church properties, would be lay brothers. They were not necessarily Templars at all, or they might be Templars in the sense of having taken the very lowest vows.
Hmm.
They would still be monks. They would still have to attend mass. They would still not be free to marry. They were not free. They took the minimum vows of chastity, obedience, and poverty, and then they worked the lands in these humble, very humble houses all across of Europe. Of course there might be 4 or 5 sands, and then the commandery would collect them, and then there might be, and a larger center would have, be controlling, say, 5 or 6 or 8 of these properties. And at that larger center, there might be a larger house with several sergeants, and maybe there'd be a recruiting place. Maybe they would be training horses. Maybe they would be, collecting swords or whatever. And you build up to then, of course, the main commanderies in England, which is in London and what is now called the Temple, where the English courts are now, or if I'm not mistaken, the Bastille was actually the Templar main Templar center in Paris.
Hmm.
These, of course, national centers were there. There were knights and there were officers. So there were the commander of entire country was a very powerful senior officer in the order, and he would have, staff and lots of knights with him. But even they were there in Europe to recruit horses and weapons and men that
Hmm.
were being sent to the extent possible out to the Holy Land to defend pilgrims initially, or to defend the castles and garrisons, and of course provide fighting troops in the Holy Land. when Philip IV strikes in 1308, the people he captures are predominantly these peasants and the sergeants and just a handful of knights.
Hmm.
The fighting men of the Templars are in Cyprus, which is the closest to the Holy Land at that point after the fall of Acre, and in, of course, the Iberian Peninsula, which is why when the Spanish king tries to attack the Templars, he has to fight bloody battles to try to take castles because there are fighting men fighting the Conquista against the Muslims still in Spain,
Mhm.
and therefore those castles are well defended by knights.
Gotcha.
But most, as I say, in England and France and most of the Holy Roman Empire, there were no the knights and sergeants that were there were often the people who were disabled because they'd been wounded on the Holy Land or they were too
Hmm.
old to fight or whatever.
Hmm.
He then puts these all in prison and he tortures them to confession. Torture at the time, it was known that they were being tortured. It was criticized at the time. In England, they refused to torture the knights. In Cyprus, they refused to torture. In other words, depending on the kingdom, it was employed or not employed. But Philip IV tried to pressure all of his fellow monarchs into torturing the Templars because that was the only way they were getting confessions. He was asking them to confess to nonsensical things that so people were not, none of them, these men, even these peasants, were not voluntarily confessing to having worshipped a cat and things like that. So,
Yeah.
you know,
Some of those
so
charges were so bizarre.
yeah. Which is why I have it. I try to explain. But the long and the short of it is there's a fight going on, and the other thing is Philip is attacking a religious order which should have been subject only to the Pope. But the Pope at this time, Clement V, only got elected because of Philip IV's support, and he knows his predecessor was destroyed by Philip. So he's sort of like the US Senate. He simply does whatever um, the dictator wants him to do.
Right. That is yeah, Clement, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Clement. Um,
Okay. So that's the historical background. The torture, except with one piece, is all based on things that are recorded.
mhm,
The fact that they were tortured, the trial that I described, they were eventually taken to trial. They were then the machinations that caused them to then be burnt at the stake, or some of them were burned at the stake that's all very, very well recorded.
mhm.
This is not anything. There was nothing mysterious about what happened to the template. It is recorded in many, many documents, contemporary documents. There's almost too much material. I think Malcolm Barber said. Malcolm Barber was the leading historian of the Templars until he died, I think, recently. And he's written not my favorite book by Malcolm Barber is just the New Knighthood, which describes it in general and how it functioned. But he also wrote an extra book on the trial of the Templar. It also um, the the Vatican records on the Templars have been opened.
Oh,
Yeah, there is nothing secret about it anymore.
okay.
And that's why, as I say in my footnote, I'm trying to find the exact date. On the 25th of October, 2007, Pope Benedict the 16th officially found the Knights Templar innocent of all charges.
Right. And yeah, that's in your historical note too, at the end of the
Yeah,
book. Um,
right. So now that's the basic framework of the novel. There is also historically recorded in the chronicles and in any of the books that you can secondary sources, that at the very final church council, which was summoned in 1311 and was supposed to just rubber stamp the guilt of the Templars based on all the confessions that had been forced out of them, um, there were many number of churchmen, particularly from the England and the Holy Roman Empire and Portugal, who still refused to rubber stamp this condemnation and said, no, there is no evidence and we don't accept evidence by torture,
yeah.
and said that the Templars should be given a chance to defend themselves and asked for defenders to come forward. And the French thought that nobody would because if they came forward after having confessed, they could be condemned as relapsed heretics and burned at the stake, which is what they've been doing.
Yeah.
And they were astonished when seven, and then this is later nine, Templars rode into Vienna in full Templar white coats on destriers and said they were there to defend the order. Nobody had realized. And they said when they came in that they had been elected by 1,500 to 2,000 Free Templars that were in the forests around Lyon.
Uh-oh.
We have no idea. I mean, this is like they just then disappear. The fact is, the people who said they would defend the order are immediately arrested, and we never hear from them again. And if there were anybody out there in Lyon, they obviously didn't cause any problems.
Yeah,
That all disappears. So, however, I took that as the basis of this book to as a novelist say, well, who might they have been, and how could they have been there?
gotcha.
And it's not alternative history because I'm not saying that the Templars win when they lose. I'm not making people alive who are dead and all of that. It's not alternative history. It is, however, sort of speculative. It's that, and it's not even that what if something else happened. It's simply trying to say, well, we know there's this little tiny incident here that just doesn't have any impact on the overall course of history. But
Okay,
could there be a core of truth to that, and what might it have looked like?
fantastic. Okay, so let's move on to the characters because I was just really first of all, I love the characters. Percy, Joffrey, the grandfather, Felice. Uh, let's start with the fact that Felice, this young girl, I think she's like 16 at the time that we meet her.
Yeah, and then we do a back, I would call it a flashback to a childhood memory, and then we move
Yes.
forward.
Now, you say in your historical note that, Felice, Percy, um, uh, was it the Bishop of Albi too? Were these
Yeah,
all
are all yes, are all fictional.
all
Well,
fictional?
Jeffrey, all of the main, with the exception of Pope Clement and Philip IV, who never actually enters the book, all the characters are fictional.
Gotcha. So, did you model your characters on any actual historical folks, or were they just all composite of the time, the place, the history?
Um, as with all my books, I think we discussed about this extensively with Moral Fiber. This is a very inspirational book. The reason I decided to pull that scene on the road into the as the preface and use it is because basically that's where the book starts.
Hmm.
In my world, I traveled a lot to the south of France at the time. My husband and I were living in Germany. It's cold and dark there in the winters. We spent our winters, from September to till March, doing our holidays, not spent continuously, but going to the south of France. And we traveled through a lot of what was more than not just the Languedoc in the modern sense, but really the Gascogne and Auvergne and
Hmm.
Limousin, the whole area south of Loire, which was very, very strong Templar area. There were lots and lots of houses, Templar houses, and therefore we stayed in places where the Templars had houses or where they had been held prisoner and where there was still, graffiti on the walls from the Templars. And
Wow,
um yeah.
that's so
And
cool.
this is also the area which had been the home of the Cathar, the Albigensian
Yes.
heresy. And there was friends of mine, English friends of mine, had a house in the Cevennes near Saint-Jean-de-Garde, which had these strong Cathar connections. Carcassonne, Albi itself are some of the most incredible cities, medieval cities. They're very evocative. If you go there and you visit these places, which are still basically medieval in their structures and
Mhm.
their marketplaces and they're very, very evocative. And then you start reading about what happened there. For me, that just always starts to juices flowing, and I start getting ideas. And I just had this image of this snowy road and this man wanting to die and being rescued. Um, Essentially, and it's a very, very important theme is that he doesn't ask to be rescued.
Yeah.
They make that decision, and therefore he owes them nothing. Jeffrey makes that very clear.
Hmm.
We made the decision, and therefore, but you do not owe us for that because you
Right.
never asked. And that's a very important thing about because at some point Percy's feeling like, well, I have to sacrifice myself to save them because they're getting in danger. And Jeffrey's saying, no, you don't, because you didn't ask us to do this. And at the same time, Percy's realizing I can't stop them from helping me because it's their own soul and their own conscious
Yes.
that is driving them. So I don't have a right to say stop helping me either.
Right.
You know, I have nothing to say about what they do. They are free souls.
Right. Free
And
will, right?
yeah.
That
So
comes
and
in.
that there's a tension between Jeffrey and Percy because they have very different ideas of what they should be doing
Yes.
as the novel goes on.
Yes, I noticed that. There was some tension, but the relationship is still very strong
Mm.
throughout. They're just, I think, yeah, Percy has like a crisis of faith at one point where he's just, kind of goes from, you know, the the broken man to the I'm gonna go kill a bunch of these people. Like I'm
The,
gonna
the,
rescue
the
my brother.
revenge.
So yeah. But what I really appreciated too was um it seems like well, I think you do, obviously, just from your other writings and like the Air Force pilots and the Berlin Airlift trilogy. There's the sense that there's a lot of PTSD going on with Percy
Oh
after,
yeah, oh, yeah,
I
absolutely,
mean, it's
absolutely.
not given that name, folks. I mean, it was the 14th century. But um,
That
you
makes
really
that
go
makes
into
sense.
the internal damage, the mental, psychological, he was really like he knew it within himself. He's like, if I have to face that torture again, I'll say whatever anyone, I can't go back there. He get physical, like sweating, and like a smell could evoke the smell of the dungeon. So I thought that was a really compelling part too.
This is one of the reasons I reissued the book, although commercially, this is absurd. I had, people advising me and they're saying, you can't write a book description that's with torture in it because then people won't buy it. And I said, look, if people can't deal with torture, they shouldn't buy the book.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't want people to buy the book thinking this is this is a sweet 14th century romance and then being confronted with my torture scenes.
Yeah.
So I'd rather be upfront about what's going on here.
Hmm.
But why was it important to release this book was in part because totally unknown to me, my sister and I lived together for a while before I married. And my sister was a journalist in Argentina and Brazil and had a number of Argentine Brazilian friends. And we were sitting in her room, and when I told this, was mentioned this to her recently, she said, "Oh yeah, that was Mario del Carrillo." I was sitting in her room and with one of her friends who I knew, very nice, as far as I knew, handsome young man, and he said that what he found that he'd read the book and it really did such a brilliant job of showing what the psychological impact of torture was.
Yes.
And it was only then that I realized he'd been tortured.
Gosh. Oh my
I was
gosh.
speaking to one of the Argentines who had gone through that.
Oh my. Mm.
And I thought, like, okay, so here's somebody who's gone through it saying that I've done this right,
Hmm.
then it's worth putting it out there.
Absolutely. Like the torture is just one aspect of the novel as far as its impact on the characters. Um, but it also opens up another area where I found it raised questions within myself as well. It's just there is a continuous theme of the how important the oaths were, the vows. Um, and it's not just the Templar vow. You see at times Felice is wrestling with
Yeah.
a vow a vow she might have made in her youth that she was like, I shouldn't have said that to this young man, or you know what I mean? Like it's um just because some of the other characters come in. There's different levels of oath taking and vow taking that are explored in this novel. And then there's that spiritual element, which on a personal level, I wanted to ask you, if was there anything that kind of you kind of put into this novel that kind of comes from your own faith history or anything like that, or
I can't say that. I strongly, as I say, I strongly believe that I'm inspired. So I tend to think that no, I'm being used as a medium, but other people. I certainly have never been tortured. I've never gone through anything like this.
Mhm,
Thank God. I never, and I don't think, and I also, even with Felice, one of the things I feel, I'm in awe of Felice because I don't think I could have done what I have her do. And
mhm,
it's like, I don't, I know myself, I couldn't do these things.
mhm.
So, and yet I still, and yet she does it, and I don't find it unbelievable when she does.
Right.
So it's like I stand in awe of this other soul who is capable of doing what she did. Um, and I don't think it's I'm not describing anything I've personally experienced, but I think at some level I am describing what other people have experienced.
Yes. Yeah. And on the level of the oh your familiarity with just like scripture and the elements of the Christian faith, was that, does that come from a personal place, or is that mostly your research into the story?
I'm a total fake, but if I say this, I'm not sure it won't damage me. I do not know scripture. I went to this. I had to research scripture. However, I have a very, very powerful faith. Um, and I actually very Christian, and I believe very, very strongly. I mean, Felice's entire argument is what I think, in a way, on that hinges the entire book.
Mm-hmm.
Her argument with the Bishop of Albi. To me, that is so important to who we are, who we should be as Christians.
Absolutely. That
Uh,
that's why it resonated with me so much. I just loved the way that she would argue and put her it was her own like case for apologetics in a sense. You know what I mean? Like she's actually trying to instruct the
yeah,
church where they've gone wrong. Um, and I really appreciated that. I felt something when I was reading that.
yeah. Thank you. That's makes my day.
Oh,
It is
absolutely.
that is to me incredible. And yet I think I try to make that with Felice, you have this dual personality in some ways. You have the 16-year-old girl who's still very much a child, and then you have the older soul inside her, which sometimes comes out and can express itself beyond what you expect out of that 16-year-old or 18-year-old body.
Yes. And,
Um,
and well, and just like everyone else in the novel, Felice she has a kind of a rough go of it.
mhm.
Between I'm trying not to give away too much, but she has some disappointments and some rejection and a lot of loss. But she keeps pushing forward.
Well, no, she comes, the key, of course, is the parallels, which, again, you can talk about theory, but in literary theory, that the parallels that Percy and Felice's lives parallel at a certain level.
Yes.
So, and that they both have a crisis, and both of them ultimately are rescued,
Hmm.
and helped out of that.
Hmm. Well, I found that, and you mentioned that this isn't a romance, but there is love. And
Mhm.
I thought the love that is there between Percy and Felice uh, really kind of grounds the novel in a very human way that people can still relate to. It's not like, this is the 14th century, so you're not gonna, this is not a bodice ripper by any means. I mean, you've got a monk and you've got, and Felice in the beginning was considering or was about to become a novitiate, or she was a novitiate, right, of the
The
Benedictines.
beginning, she's just a student. She's a boarder in the school. Then her mother decides it's cheaper to put her into the convent, so she is in the novitiate, which Percy strongly objects to, but for not the reasons you think, because he thinks it would be better for her to marry. He's
Yes.
willing to give her away to another man rather than see her go to the church because he has now broken, he can't deal with this church that's killing their own sons, kind of stuff. So,
Yes. Yes.
but when he's talking to her about this, he's talking to her much more as a brother than as a lover. I mean, his concern is that she shouldn't be taking vows to this institution that will torture their own children.
Yes.
Um, and then I don't, it's not that much. She does marry, and then, so the story is not a straightforward love story. But yes, she rescues him, and as I say, he surrenders to her in some level. He surrenders his soul to her benevolence.
Hmm.
And there is a tie between them from that moment on, which remains throughout the novel. They both understand each other at a level that is beyond the spoken word.
Hmm.
Not, but I think what I'm trying to say, it's not an erotic level. It is for me. The book is very much in a sense, it's about platonic love between the two of them.
Would you
That's
call
the love between them is far more than a mere erotic attraction. Shall we put it that way?
Yes. When I think of that type of love, I think of is it, would you call it agave love?
Hmm.
Have you heard of that
No,
term?
yes, I can't. No, I
Oh,
can't
okay. Well,
relate
that it basically means platonic, and it's just a pure godlike love. You know what
Yeah,
I mean? It has
yeah,
nothing carnal. It's a spiritual,
yeah,
pure, all-encompassing love, agave. And so that's what I got from this.
yeah.
Um, and I tell you what, just letting the readers or the viewers at home know that Helena is a heck of a writer. These pages were turning for me, and I know that before we began the recording, we talked about oh, just how you have to kind of you're trying to get these books out because the mainstream press is just like, they're very choosy and frankly, a lot of the stuff they're putting out right now is it's not anywhere near this level. Do you know what I mean? But so I love that you're doing your own thing with your stories and getting it out there for readers. So all I can do is encourage viewers to check out Helena's books because they're amazing. Now, having said that, I've read this book, and now, of course, I want to read all of your other ones about about this time frame. Um, and I know
Thank
you're
you.
working on another book.
Kind. Although I again I went for republishing this because I do think it is one of my strongest books um thematically. Um the other strong one, if you choose, just have to pick and choose one, is Envoy of Jerusalem, jumping into the third book of the Envoy. That's another one
Yes.
which is more has a lot more. Some of them
I
are
have that
more.
right here. You're so
That's
good
right,
to
that
send
one.
this one to me. Is this the first, or is this the first
That's
in
the
the
third,
Valiant? The third. So I need
third of
to
the
try to
Balian
get my
ones.
hands
Yeah.
on the other two. Um, yeah, because now I'm like, well, I'm diving into this series next. Because you have such an eye and an ear for this era as well. I want to point it, that was the other point I wanted to touch on was the research that you did for this goes beyond just like the historical, like this is what happened to the Templars. You researched the fashion. Vivid depictions of what they wore, like the both the men and the women. Um,
That's why I always say that writing fiction is harder than writing nonfiction because you can do nonfiction that's very focused on very specific aspects. I like to give the example of, so I did a nonfiction book about women pilots in World War II. And I could do this like, so recruitment, demographics, training, uh, conditions of employment, casualties, got clear things, right? If I write a novel about those women, I have to know what music are they listening to, as you say, what fashions do they wear, what
mhm.
with what were the expected dating procedures, there's a thousand more things to research in a novel than in writing a nonfiction piece.
Yeah, to make it real, you've got to like detail what they're doing throughout the day.
Mhm.
I mean, and you can't just guess that stuff. You have to make it sound of that era, of that time frame,
Well,
and you do it.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I just
Yes, no problem. Um,
unfortunately, too many writers don't. I've read novels set in the 12th century where the women are in tight-waisted dresses with low-cut bodices. It's
hmm.
like, no.
No, that's not. There's a lot of overcoats in this one, and they were fully clothed up in this one.
And they were loose-fitting clothes, and there was good reasons for that because
Right.
they didn't have the technologies yet for some of these corsets and stuff that later come in. I mean,
Of course.
but you will read so much nonsense out there,
Hmm.
but what
Hmm.
can you do?
Well, I guess I just kind of I think I skipped over this question. I was just curious. Did you have an interest in the Templars early on? In like when did you become interested in this topic?
I don't know. We're going back too far. I
Okay.
probably it probably came about with being in the south of France. It probably came by just visiting these places. And I'm the kind of person who when I'm visiting, I love architecture. And so if I go into some place, and then there'll always guidebooks. In Europe, they're really fantastic with guidebooks until you start reading about something and it describes probably I was in some place that started talking about and there's a who were they, and then end up looking them up, and then because I have the degree in history and then I do serious research. If I get interested in something, maybe it's just a casual reference or whatever, then I go back and I start looking at serious sources, and then you can go from the sources to the sources of the sources, and
Hmm.
you can do this whole chain of research based on how interested you are. And the Templars is not something about which there's a lot of confusion. I mean, there is a lot of confusion because people insist on talking these conspiracy theories and all this fantasy world that has built up around them. And I have
Yes.
people telling me, well, why don't you do that? Because it's more popular. And it's like, that's not who I am.
Hmm.
Um, but there's nothing secretive about the Templars. Their order, the rule of the order was published then. It was everybody could read it.
Right.
You
Right.
know, it was established by one of the leading figures of the time, Bernard de Clairvaux. The Templars were not a secretive order.
Hmm.
They were not, there was nothing. They were a powerful order at their height. They were a rich order. There were other Christian institution houses that were jealous because they were getting donations
Right.
that might have gone to the Benedictines, had gone to or might have gone, the rich widow dies and the bishop thought he was going to get it, and instead it went to the Templars. He gets annoyed. But it's not as though at the time anybody thought they were anything but what they were, which was, very devout Catholic monks.
Right.
And the leading clergy saw them that way, and they were
Hmm.
praised by leading clergy for being such a devout Christian knights.
Well, it's
And yeah.
oh, I was just going to say, so it was odd to me then in that case that well, they were all hate to use the word, but trumped up charges against them, right? Because the King of France wanted the money.
Yeah.
They were wealthy, and like you mentioned, two other orders might have been jealous. Like you've got a scene in there with the hospital. How do you pronounce? Is it
Oh,
Hospitalers or
Hospitalers is what I've already heard. The Knights of St.
Hospitalers?
John.
Yeah.
The Knights of St. John.
Okay. But they were another well-known order, I think, almost on the level of the Templars, right? Weren't
Oh,
the Hop?
I love if I were going to write now, I'd probably write about the Hospitallers because the Templars are more famous, although they were destroyed. The Hospitallers literally start earlier. They start with a hospital, and they are dedicated to helping the poor and the sick. And they have their oath says specifically, you treat the sick, the patients as your masters. You are the slaves of your patients.
Mm.
And they not only hired Jewish and Muslim doctors, they treated Jewish and Muslim patients the same way. If they went to a battlefield, like they picked up all the wounded regardless of what side they had fought on.
Hmm.
The Hospitallers were an amazing order. And then of course, they survive. They still exist to this day. That's the knights. They became the Knights of Rhodes and then Malta, and
Oh,
they
right.
still exist in the St. John's Hospital Corps, etc. There's a lot. They broke into a number as when with the Reformation there, but they and no institution can be the same over 1,000 years. So you get various phases when they were more corrupt or less corrupt or more fighting and less hospital. But in the time period of the Crusades, the Hospitallers were probably more Christian in the sense the Templars were always fighting for us. The Hospitallers was always a combination of hospital and social welfare, or they ran orphanages.
Hmm.
They had women members, which the Templars never did, because the Templars were knights and women were not knights.
Yeah.
Now, as I said, the Templars were not all knights because they had this large lay brothers and this whole back, but the knights of the temple were expected to be fighting men, and the Hospitallers, the second most important officer after the master was the Grand Hospitaller. It was the person responsible for the hospitals.
Hmm.
They introduced hospitals in the West, basically, the Hospitallers. Fantastic order.
Wow. Well, do you
Fascinating.
think, I know you've got other projects. Do you
Yeah.
do you think that this is a topic down the road you might revisit as far as, or
No.
have you kind of written everything that there is to?
Yeah, I don't feel like there's that all that much new to add.
Okay,
Um,
gotcha.
it's hard,
Gotcha.
it's
Well,
hard. But I never know what will inspire me.
okay, fair enough. It's kind of like the wind, it blows every which way, inspiration. Um, would you, because this is kind of a personal question for me, just for my benefit, but I think also for the viewers, is there like some recommended reading? You mentioned Malcolm Barber.
Oh yeah, let me pull this. Let me
Yeah,
see.
like what would be some great books that people, if they want to just learn about the Templars, who are your go-tos?
Okay. And I have it only on Kindle. Wait a minute, I have one that can tell me. Okay. So the Malcolm Barber was absolutely the most important scholar on the Templars until he died recently. And he was University of Reading and the trial of the Templars, and I think the best overview was called The New Knighthood, A History of the Order of the Temple. This is scholarly. It's not difficult to read. Cambridge University Press. What is it?
Mhm.
400 pages.
Hmm.
If you read nothing else, but you read Barber's New Knighthood, you will have the historical truth about the Templars. If you want something a little bit easier to read, that's still absolutely founded in history, the French historian Regina Pernot, this is little one here. It's
Oh,
called The Templars Knights of Christ. As you can see, it's
yep.
just a little, it's 150 pages. She
Great.
writes in a very witty, loose, little more less dry. I mean, she's a fun. I find her a fun read. My favorite book by her is the those terrible Middle Ages.
Yes,
When
I've heard of
when
that.
she makes fun. She makes fun of all the people who think those terrible Middle Ages, debunking the myths.
Oh,
And
fantastic.
she really, and then she done a book called The Women in the Days of the Cathedral, where she talks about how powerful women were, and again debunking the myths. She's a really fun
Jean Pierre.
scholar, French expert on the Middle Ages. Helen Nicholson has taken over from Malcolm Barber as the leading English historian of the Templars, I would say. I mean, I'm sure there are people in England who are probably cringing and saying, why not? Why don't you say me? But to be fair, Helen Nicholson is really an excellent scholar on the Knights Templar, and she's done a couple of her books that I recommend strongly. I've got this on the Shepherd page, is the Knights Templar New History. The reason I like this, it doesn't say anything different than what Malcolm Barber said, but she's got it full of pictures.
Oh, I love
She
it.
it's like she's got from illustrations from manuscripts, she's got photographs, she's got
Oh,
seals,
that's
it's
fantastic.
just it's just and that makes the text, it's a good read. And then she's written this one called The Templars at Home.
Oh,
And it's about the 90% of the Templars who weren't fighting men, but who were actually on the farms and praying, and what it's like for
right.
them. And it's such an important contribution to the scholarship of the Templars. And so those are what I strongly recommend. Yeah,
Yeah, could you hold up the Malcolm Barber book again, just so we can see the full jacket? I want to.
it
Okay,
could have a new jacket. Can
there we go.
you?
The Knighthood, a history of the Order of the Temple. Okay. Yeah, and it might have a jacket. We don't know, but
Yeah,
well, these are books I'm going to be looking up
yeah.
because, and it looks like Regine Pernoud. She one of those books was is from Ignatius. a
Oh, yeah,
press.
two of them. I
Yep.
think also
Okay. That makes sense. It's a Catholic press.
for late women in the not finding it fast enough. But what about women? The women in the days of the cathedrals is also Ignatius, I think.
Okay.
Okay, so two
Th
of them.
th yeah, thank you for giving some of some suggestions for the rest of us to continue. I have a couple of other books on Templars, but they're mostly tied in with like the Crusades, the First Crusade
Yeah,
and
yeah,
stuff
yeah.
like
Well,
that. But I'd like
they
a
weren't on
dedic.
the First Crusade.
What's that?
They're not founded until after the First Crusade. The Templars
Oh,
cannot take part in the First Crusade.
then
They're
what was?
founded afterwards in 1119, and they don't get
Oh,
their rule to 1129.
okay.
They make their reputation on the Second Crusade.
I think I was confusing it with a book I have just on the First Crusade, but I think I saw like the little. And by the way, I want to mention your
I'm
lapel pin.
wearing, yes.
You've got a Templar pin. I love it.
It's not really. It's actually, I got this on Malta. But
Oh, okay. Well,
but I
look,
thought I'd wear white and the Red Cross.
see, that
And
is so
and this is
perfect.
the cross of Jerusalem here.
Oh, you are kitted out for this interview. Um, well, I know that we're running out of time, but was there anything else you'd like to talk about with this book and what you hope new readers might discover?
Uh, Me, I guess, as a
Well,
writer, obviously.
outside of your wonderful work, yes.
I just the book is really about, as you say, fighting tyranny, and it's about people's internal conflict. It's about faith. It's about right and wrong. It is a really um, it works at a lot of different levels, but it's mostly about people trying to find their way in the darkness.
I'm gonna tell you what, I think having just read this and with the state of the world as it is right now, it it's an important work because it does ask you questions. What would you do in the face of someone telling you, throwing accusations against you, demonizing you for your beliefs, or it just it's still it's relevant. It's just a timeless relevance, this question of oppression, tyranny, um, and I don't know. It kind of it makes you think, what would I do? What would I do?
Yeah,
I know.
as I say,
Enough
very
said, I
frightening. I
guess. We
find it
don't
very
want
frightening
to.
because it's very I find it very frightening because I don't. My characters are much better than I am as a human.
Oh,
But no, but I think, but I guess that's what, in a way, that's what writing is about. It's about trying to make us strive to be better than we are.
right.
Um,
That is so
and
well put.
Oh, I guess another point I guess I would want to say didn't talk about at all was Umberto, because I'm actually quite proud of my character Umberto. Umberto is the character who fails the test, so to speak, the one who is who allows ambition to take him from the path of righteousness. And
Yes.
I think that's very important. And I think he also plays an important role in this as showing us the the perils or the I don't know, the temptations that we all have.
Yeah, I didn't mention him by name just because I wasn't sure if I should, reveal some of the plot developments. But I always found the scenes with Umberto very intriguing because you can see that he starts off so fresh and passionate about uh you know uh, working for the church and believing in the cause, but then he's faced with those scenes in the dungeon, you
Mm,
know, and then he kind of he can't physically withstand the things he sees, and gets sick, but then he worries, oh, I've diminished myself in the eyes of the bishop, I should be harder, and that's where it all kind of starts going left for him, it's like you're more concerned about what the
yep,
bishop, because he's employing you, and you're more concerned about your climb up
image.
the ladder, he just wants to kind of keep getting more plum positions within the church and stuff like that. So yeah, you see all facets of where faith is strong and it persists, and then you see the other side of it where faith can devolve into, or you know, it can
Maybe,
devolve into
um,
ugly things. I'll just say.
although to me, Umberto, the point about Umberto is that he's not evil. He's basically not evil. He's basically just weak.
Yeah.
And then, and I, even to the end, I mean, I think he's an interesting character, but maybe I didn't get it quite right.
No,
That's what
I think he is an interesting character. It just goes to show that there's the people are complicated,
Mm.
and there's times where it shows that he shows where he's going to redeem himself, and then he'll take a step back. Like the rest of us, two steps forward, one step back.
Yeah.
But I kept rooting for Umberto, to turn the corner. Um, but yeah, this book was just filled with so many opportunities for food for thought. It was historically fascinating. It makes me want to just dive into Templar stuff right now. I want to learn more. But it made me tear up at many points. I'm just going to say personally. I thought the scene with Felice and her grandmother, Eleanor, in the very beginning, I think I told you this already in an email, but it had me crying because, you kind of took just on a personal note, I never heard anyone say like on their deathbed, usually it's like take care of everyone, but at the same time she's getting ready to go off into the unknown, she's going off into that great unknown and she's like, well, what am I going to do without these people with me?
Mhm.
That really stood out to me, that one line. It's like, well, you're going to go as a Christian. I'm like, well, you're going to
Yeah.
be in heaven, but she's still like, well, what am I going to do without my husband? Like think about me. And it was just like, oh, that's true. It's just like we always think about, well, when we pass over, we're not going to think about, we're going to be done with this
Gonna
life. But
miss.
she's like, no, all you people mean so much to me. What am I going to do without you? So I don't know. You introduced some really original takes on that, some original thoughts, and it touched me. I'm just going to say that.
I thank the people who inspire me.
Oh,
I feel I hope that I've been a good medium, but that's for them.
well, I'm going to tell everyone right now, you can't go wrong reading The Tale of the English Templar by Helena P. Schrader. We're going to be back again soon to discuss the final volume in your trilogy, the Bridge to Tomorrow trilogy about the Berlin airlift. So I'm really excited to finally read the final volume. But like I said, I loved it, and it's going on my right here next to all my other novels that you've sent and I've purchased, and I just love this novel. And I don't know why it's taken me so long to get to this one, but I'm glad that it came out in a new edition. I'm glad.
Yeah, I am too. I don't want people reading the old edition. It is, I did say I tried to be sensitive, but
Mhm.
it is definitely it's a different book. I don't want people reading the old version anymore.
Gotcha. So only look for this one, folks. And I love the cover, by the way. So is that a new cover?
Yes, it
Or
is.
it's
Yep.
fantastic.
New title and new cover to try to keep people from being confused.
Perfect. All right. Well, you've got your marching orders, everybody. This is the book to look for. Helena, thanks for being on the
You're
History
welcome.
Shelf and talking with me again today.
Thank you for having me. It's
You're
always fun.
welcome, and we will be back very soon. But in the meantime, everyone, check out the Tale of the English Templar, and we'll see you back here at the History Shelf. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.